Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk9527. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we're back with a well-known punk, Punk2099. He's got two addies, the iconic handlebar mustache and baller headband. He's got quite the resume. He's deeply knowledgeable in art, having previously worked at Christie's and led the historical Beeple NFT sale for a record of $69 million. He was a brand lead for CryptoPunks at Yuga Labs and also an artist and founder of HowlerzNFT. Please welcome non-fungible Noah to the show. Noah, how are you?
Hey Max, great to be here.
No, lovely to have you, mate. Finally get to get you on the show. Wanted to sort of do this for quite some time. I think you've got quite the sort of background. I think a lot of people will be intrigued to sort of hear the story about how you got here, and obviously the $69 million sale and all the stuff happening at Yuga as well. So great to have you on. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Max. Thank you so much, man. I'm excited for this. And I hate to have a correction so early on, but I guess I changed my Twitter handle to CryptoPunkNoah recently. I ditched non-fungible because it started sounding almost slur-like to me. You know, everyone was shying away from the non-fungible token name. And I honestly, between you and I mean now between everyone listening to this podcast as well, that acronym NFT always sounded so stupid to me. So I'm very happy to now be CryptoPunkNoah to step away from the non-fungible moniker.
Easy for me. So well, cool. I think there's a lot to sort of unpack, but maybe we could just start with your background and I think everything leading up before NFTs, but be interested to sort of learn, I guess, your backstory about where you grew up, where you studied, and how you ended up at Christie's, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I grew up in Los Angeles and found it to be, while a really pleasant environment, not necessarily very stimulating or exciting. And I think I just wanted badly to be in a proper big city. It gets a bit nauseating, honestly, just being in the sunshine all the time. It's 70 something degrees constantly. It's always pleasant. Everyone has their kind of like distance and their prescribed space that they inhabit. And I just wanted to be close to everything and feeling this kind of intensity that I think New York is advertised as having, right? So applied to college to go to NYU as my top choice school. I got in, I studied English and French and art history. My major was English, and I double minored in art history and French. But at NYU, they let you get really focused and creative with your major. So I was mostly studying absurdist French literature, post-war French dramaturgy mostly. So writers like Antonin Artaud and Camus and Voltaire and Beckett, of course, UNESCO, and all these guys, Jean Genet, super important for me and pretty fundamental to my understanding of how humans interact with one another, how we get shit done, how crazy it is to just be a human being in the contemporary world. For them, it was the modern world or the postmodern world, but all of that kind of informs the way I think about crypto and NFTs and certainly the art space, the art world. But yeah, during college, I interned at Gagosian Gallery, which is probably the biggest behemoth of the blue chip art world. Throughout college, they didn't offer me a job. Speaks to my competency as an intern. And then I got a job at Sotheby's. So first I worked at Sotheby's auction house. I was a fine arts administrator, doing the grunt work in the trenches, kind of where I really did cut my teeth there. Then I became a post-sale manager, which is basically a combination of a therapist and an accountant, because you have to deal with people when you have to deal with people when things go wrong. You have to tell them like, oh shit, we broke your art that we were sending you that you spent tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on. And you also have to chase the people that are deadbeats. You have to balance the books, right? And I had no business being in this role. I really don't. I'm not a mathematical person. I'm good at the therapist part for sure, but it was really a drag. It was honestly just sapping all of my energy, and I was working in these really strange departments where I didn't have any kind of affinity for the art that was being handled. So I did Asia Week. I did ancient Chinese art and Asian art, and I did prints and multiples and watches and clocks. But always, I just wanted to be in contemporary art. And so when I got the chance to be a cataloger at Christie's, I jumped. They offered me a job. I went to Christie's. I worked there as a cataloger, worked my way up to specialist, learned a lot in a very short window of time about contemporary artists and how art gets made. And it was extremely fulfilling and fun and weird and also extremely stressful, high pressure gig. But that set me up for crypto and NFTs. When the pandemic rolled in and we all went remote, I didn't own my own laptop. I was feeling extremely alienated and super claustrophobic. Really, I had to go back to LA, where I mentioned how LA makes me feel. Actually, my wife and I lived in 9 different places, I think, during 2021 to 2023. So very intense time. But when the Beeple sale happened, and I say it like that because that's really how it went down. It happened to me. It wasn't a thing that I went out and sought out and made happen. It happened to me. I was in the right place at the right time. And I think that is pretty much how the world works. It's this kind of constant transfer of energy, and the monkey bars are invisible until they aren't. They appear and you've got to swing. So yeah, by the end of that year, I went from no laptop and zero technical acumen, being kind of a Luddite by choice. We can get into that. But by the end of that year, I had 90% of my net worth allocated to crypto and NFTs. So it all happened very, very fast. And I love it. I love it here. I don't regret anything about it.
Amazing. Wow. There's a few parts I just want to go back and pick apart, but maybe I was just curious as to, your transition from, that point from LA into New York, and you applying for NYU more for art school. But was there anything that really drew you to art? I mean, of all the things you could have, interested in growing up, what was it about art that sort of piqued your interest?
How fucking weird it is. It is the weirdest and the most useless, ostensibly. Like, if you're looking at it from the point of view of somebody trying to understand like the role that it plays in the world, it's the most useless genre of creativity there is. Like, my dad was a musician. He was a songwriter, singer-songwriter, and I played in bands growing up. Played at the Roxy and the Whiskey and these little dumb punk rock groups. But I didn't want to be a musician because then I would be obliged to make money from doing something I love. And I always think that money kind of pollutes the equation. And that felt wrong to me. My dad was a celebrity in his day, and he was definitely damaged by fame. And I never really wanted that for myself. So chose to be in art also because, music was my number one love at the time. So art was a way to be in a creative space that felt kind of silly and unsafe and dangerous maybe, but also, challenging and stimulating, and trying to figure out why it is that a urinal on its side on a pedestal should be considered great art. I'm talking about Duchamp. That was seemingly like the most fun I could possibly have, is justifying this because it's so ridiculous.
Sounds just like NFTs is the way that you're describing it.
Right. I mean, that was part of the draw. It's always been part of the draw. And that's part of why I'm still fascinated by this space, is because it is so ridiculous and absurd. But it points to a kind of fallacy and the excitement of being human, like assigning meaning and where do you draw that from? The emperor has no clothes is another thing that I think about a lot. That story I think is relevant for crypto and NFTs.
And you mentioned a guy, Jean Genet, that you learned a lot from. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. Who was he? And I guess what's the TLDR in terms of what you guys sort of learned from him?
Dude, I'm really glad you zeroed in on Jean Genet. So Jean Genet is a fascinating figure. He was born. It's not really totally certain, I think, where exactly or when, but he was born towards the end of the 19th century or thereabouts in France or the environs. And he grew up an orphan, bouncing from missionary to missionary, whatever. Back in the day, there weren't really proper orphanages, I guess, in France, and so he was gay. Knew this from an early age, and refused to be anything but himself. And at that point in time, obviously, it's a very dangerous thing to be a gay man in France and to be itinerant and to not have a home or a family. And he survived by living on the street and prostituting himself and stealing and just being a very bold individual, independent person, a free person. And in that, there is a certain kind of radical freedom that is hard to pin down. It feels like from the outside, oh man, that sounds like a terrible way to live. But for him, there was this kind of freedom in the transcendency, the transgression of it. And he became a famous playwright and a poet, and against the odds, right? He wrote these plays, these really enigmatic, sexy, weird, fucked up plays about power dynamics in human arrangements. The most famous is called Les Bonnes, or the Maids, and it's about these two maids who, when their maîtresse, their mistress is gone, they pretend they switch roles. They pretend to be her and dominate each other. And you don't really know what's going on throughout the play. You're trying to figure it out, and it's very, very, very sexy and intriguing and kind of risque, right? But so this guy, Jean Genet, despite finding success and becoming an intellectual lodestar in the avant-garde in Paris, he still kept stealing, and he kept on being this kind of, I don't want to say repugnant, because for himself, I think he was resplendent. It was like he was joyous in doing all this stuff. But he kept on stealing and kept getting caught, and he eventually was thrown in jail. And all these intellectuals at the time wrote this letter and demanded his release, and the French government actually conceded. They let him go. So Picasso and I think Baudelaire and others all signed this letter begging them to release Jean Genet from prison, like forgive him for his wrongs, because the art that he's made should be a get out of jail free ticket. And it really was. And I think all of that is just fascinating and so fun and ridiculous. And we don't have that kind of respect for the artiste, if you will, in contemporary life. So it's nice to know that back in the day, Jean Genet could get away practically with murder, really, just by writing ridiculously complex and weird gems of avant-garde theater.
Fascinating. I must admit, like, I am a history and an art noob, but I think since getting into NFTs, I've sort of devoured as much as I can about history and art, and trying to learn as much as I can. So I find that super fascinating. So I'll have to definitely sort of look him up. And then
read the Maids. Les Bonnes, the Maids is by Jean Genet, is amazing. And then Notre Dame de Fleurs, Our Lady of Flowers, is also fantastic. That's a first person diary, basically, of his experience.
It's called The Maids, Maids.
The Maids. Yeah. Or in French, it's Les Bonnes, LESBONNES.
Okay. Right. Fantastic. All right. Yeah, I'll definitely have to look that up. And you were talking about Sotheby's. I think you mentioned your first role in contemporary art as a cataloger. What is a cataloger?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that was at Christie's. And in the contemporary art department, the cataloger, or really in any fine art department at an auction house, the cataloger is tasked with handling the art, from the ground floor, from A to Z, or from 0 to 360. You're trying to tell the story of the art that the auction house is selling. So the specialist in charge of any auction they're the ones who put a price tag on these things that get sold. But when they finally arrive at the auction house after the administrator handles the shipping and they bring the art in, it's the cataloger's duty to inspect it firsthand, to write the condition report describing, the state that it's in, the physical state of the art, and also to perform all the due diligence required to sell this thing. So you got to figure out, where did it come from? You got to zero in on the provenance. You have to find all of the literature and exhibition history for the artwork. And this is achieved depending on the artist who you're handling. You have to go and hit the books. You've got to look up all of the exhibition catalogs and literature that exists about the artist, or you can contact their estate, or you can contact their gallerist. And all of these things are unique. Each path that you must take is unique to the artist you're handling. And sometimes politics gets involved, like people get upset about the fact that a painting or a sculpture or whatever, a work of art is going to auction, and then you inadvertently have kicked this hornet nest, and you have to navigate all of these complex things. So I don't know. I think it's kind of like being on a scavenger hunt in a way. But it's all really so rewarding because you get to handle the art and you get to solve these little mysteries. Like, you're so up close and personal with it. And so I got to look super close under blacklight at so many different paintings, trying to figure out if they'd ever been damaged or restored, or it just feels like you're a bit like an archaeologist too, or a detective and an archaeologist. So kind of an amazing thing.
Sounds like a super cool job, man.
Yeah, it's stressful too. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not that glamorous. Like you're at the end of the day, you're in a basement, and you are under strict deadlines to publish these catalogs and get these paintings and stuff sold. And everything comes down to you, like the success of a $20 million auction, right? It comes down to you and your admin and your art handlers. And it's not a glorious solo journey. It's one of collaboration and really a lot of pressure. So.
Gotcha. And you said the specialist is responsible for finding a price for the piece?
Right. Yeah. So I made my way up to specialist in the department. I was handling mostly the online sales. So all the contemporary art online sales running out of New York. I was responsible for sourcing the property in that sale and giving it estimates. And, I would sometimes source property for other auctions, not even necessarily all just contemporary art auctions, but I would also travel to go and do insurance valuations and appraisals and things like that on artwork. But assigning a value is the role of the specialist. So somebody emails you information about a painting or a sculpture or a drawing or whatever it is, or they call you up and they tell you about it. And then you have to go on this quest to pin the tail on the donkey and give it a low estimate, a high estimate, and a proposal for sale.
How do you value a piece of trad art? Like, because I'm assuming if you get like a one of one piece, there's not a lot of comparables out there. Like how are you sort of, is there like a methodical sort of process, or is it just more, experience and sort of feel in terms of where the market's pricing things at?
It's a great question, and maybe the answer is a little surprising, but like there are multiple facets that you have to consider. But for most of the stuff that comes to auction, there is a precedent. There aren't a lot of surprises in art at auction. So yeah, they're one of one works, but they typically belong to a series by an artist who's established and well known. Auction houses have been doing this for decades. Contemporary art has been around for decades. Since the 80s or late 70s, really, there's been a market for contemporary art and a secondary market. The auction house is the secondary market, right? Because the dealer sells the art or the artist sells the art from their studio, and then someone else is typically the seller at an auction. So we call that a secondary market. So over these decades, a lot of information has accumulated, and a lot of recent information has accumulated because auctions are cyclical and they happen on a pretty regular, at very, very regular, strict basis. So when something comes in, let's say it's an Alexander Calder gouache, you have a plethora of previous results to draw from. And sometimes, even though it's contemporary art, sometimes these works have been at auction before. I've seen some works in contemporary art that have been at 5 or 6 different auctions, or more. So you have this data to draw from, and you do go and look for a comparable work, and you try to price it in a kind of sweet spot, like a Goldilocks region, where the estimate's going to be low enough that it's exciting to people, but high enough that it doesn't feel like a massive risk for the owner. And doing that is sometimes as simple as just going to a database like ArtNet and plugging in the parameters for the artwork that you're dealing with, looking at the recent results, and then saying, aha, there's the comp. I'm going to price this one notch below, and then you're done. You can price Calder gouaches, especially because they just come up so often. It's like, if you tell me the dimensions and the date and the condition of the work, I don't even need to see it to really give you the estimate. It's going to be 30 to 50, 40 to 60. If it's really great, it's going to be 60 to 80,000. That's it. That's like the range for Calder gouaches. But if it's something more unique, like David Hammond's, I sold a David Hammond's it was just a mason jar full of twigs. And at the time, there was no comparable auction record for it. So it was kind of like, shooting in the dark. But you kind of, that for those, you need to rely more on your instinct.
Yeah, gotcha. Mate, I could sort of sit here and pick your brain all day. I'm so curious about the whole trad art sort of space and how that sort of works. But maybe just before we get into the Beeple piece, because I do want to spend a bit of time on that. But besides the Beeple piece, what was your, I guess sort of your most memorable sort of sale prior to Beeple? Like, what did you sort of close?
Oh man, well, so I mean, I love telling this one story of this artwork that I helped to handle as a cataloger, but I didn't sell it. So maybe it's a cheat, a way of cheating to answer your question. But so anyway, it's a piece by an artist named Mario Merz, who is an Italian arte povera practitioner. Arte povera literally means poor art. And what these guys would do is, in the Duchampian tradition, they would take stuff that already exists. They would take ready-made things of as their name implies, of like impoverished nature, random stuff that they found, and then combine it in weird ways that would challenge you to think differently about the world and about your senses and about the art world potentially too also. But these were kind of highfalutin dudes for the most part, and some women too. But the artwork we're talking about here is from a series that Mario Merz made, where he would take taxidermied animals and he would put them on the wall, hang them like they're an artwork way high up off the wall. Nominally, these are sculptures. And he would then take Fibonacci numbers and render them in neon and hang those in an arc on the wall that would terminate in or begin with the taxidermied animal. Why he did this, I really don't know. All I know is that there's a really fascinating enigma there that's fun to play with, and it's visually compelling, right? It's like glowing numbers on a wall next to a dead animal. How could you not love this? There's an amazing, by the way, if anyone's listening who's in New York City or nearby, there's an amazing museum in Cold Spring, New York called Magazzino, which has nothing but arte povera on the walls. So it's just such a treat. It's a really fun museum to visit because it has nothing but art like this. Anyway, I was selling this a piece from this series by Mario, and it involved a taxidermied crocodile, it was a caiman crocodile. So it's an endangered crocodile, and he made this thing in the 70s, and it was my job to find a replacement for the crocodile because, as taxidermy does over the course of decades, it starts to crumble and fall apart. And so how do you replace an ancient dead crocodile? That was my job. So I had to go on eBay and look for similar stuffed crocodiles or alligators that could fit the bill. The other part here is that this thing, all of the really mundane realities kind of creep in. Like this crocodile was probably imported illegally from Italy, at some point. When Mario Merz made this thing, he just probably picked it up from a thrift shop somewhere in Italy. And then eventually it made its way to the States. But crocodile and caiman, those are CITES protected animals. So you can't sell something that was imported illegally into the country. So what do you do? Anyways, this is a long story. To make a long story short, we wound up 3D printing a replacement and having it hand painted. And this is how the artist's estate dictates you handle these things. But we had like 5 or 6 different crocodiles and alligators stuffed, and prepared for the estate to make their choice to pick one. And then we finally wound up 3D printing it, painting it, and selling it. By this point in time, I'd already moved on from the sale, right? This is a story that unfolds over the course of like a year. And eventually this thing sold for more than $1 million. So it's like really insane to think. I mean, that theater of the absurd major, while it might not have seemed very helpful at the time, I think it really did help me to navigate the art world, and especially crypto and NFTs, because all this stuff is crazy, man. It's really fun and silly.
That is crazy. But like, so to what extent does it, still become part of the artist's work? I mean, if you're 3D printing and then painting it, that still forms part, that's still considered part of the artist's work? Like,
totally. Yeah. It's a shit. And your reaction is the same one that I had. I would have preferred, if it were me and I'm not the artist and I'm not the artist's estate, I would have wanted it to be replaced with something that is the most like the thing I was replacing. Right. But it's sort of it's the ship of Theseus thing. Can you replace it and it's still a one-to-one? If it is a one-to-one faithful model, is it as good as the other thing? I think in this case, they're thinking about it from the perspective of a visual artwork. As long as it is evoking the same feelings in the room to the viewer, that it is sufficient. And if it's the most convenient, then by all means, then that should be enough. The authority here is the artist's estate. So that's ultimately who we're listening to. And the collector too is also going to make a decision about how much this is worth. It's an open market. It's a fair market to an extent, right? As all markets are fair to an extent. But I think that's something that people come to a consensus on, right? It's not just one person who comes up with the answer.
Gotcha. It's I thought it was kind of funny when you're talking about looking up on eBay and seeing if there were any sort of comparable crocodiles out there or stuffed crocodiles out there. It just reminds me of buying dolphins on Craigslist at the time. That was sort of coming out.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely absurd. I have a whole story about interacting with this man named Foxy who ran a gator farm in Florida, and we can get into that one day, but it's too much for this one podcast. It was quite a mission, really.
Can imagine. So you were at Christie's, and then COVID hit. And you're in charge of contemporary art. How did Christie's sort of transition into NFTs and get Beeple sort of on there? Like, was it basically the first NFT sale from Christie's, or had they sold?
No, that was the first one. Yeah, the Beeple NFT was the first NFT sold by a major auction house. It was the first one we'd handled. It was the first one I'd handled. I remember the day that the opportunity presented itself. You keep saying, how did Christie's find it? How did Christie's get involved? It really didn't work that way. It was like it happened to us. It was sort of inevitable, like very fate kind of driven thing. But I remember the day that the opportunity presented itself, because it was a very monumental kind of day. It was January 6th when the Capitol riots were happening. I was in the office in New York City, and I was laying out my next online sale. So I was choosing the order of the lots in the auction, which is a very loaded decision. Like, you have to keep the momentum of the sale going. And anyway, I was standing there with all these printouts and putting them arranging them in a grid. And my colleague Megan is really brilliant young woman named Megan Doyle, and she's no longer at Christie. She's off and doing her own thing now, not involved in crypto and NFTs to my knowledge at all. But she asked, "Hey, would you be interested in putting an NFT in your auction?" And I took a beat and I tried to rack my brain and think, what is an NFT? And she reminded me, there's this phenomenon, there's this thing popping off right now, really. And she showed me Beeple's sale at Nifty Gateway, where he'd recently sold, millions of dollars worth of NFTs. And I thought, okay, sure. Yeah, I'll put one in my auction. Why not? That sounds fun. That sounds absurd and ridiculous. Like, sell art that doesn't exist. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And then I didn't really look back, from that moment on. Obviously that decision would completely capsize my life, or turn it upside down, shake it up, and inject all this chaos into it. But at that point, I had no idea. I really had no idea.
So can you timestamp that, Noah? So that was January 2021, was it?
Yeah, January 6th, 2021, while the Capitol riots were happening. It's so fitting, but while the Capitol riots were happening, somebody asked me, would you want to put an NFT in your auction? And then that NFT wound up being the Beeple NFT.
It's crazy. And I think was there any contention with that, or was that just purely your decision? You're like, "Yep, cool, I'm happy with that." Was there
I
anybody
had
at
to get
Christie's?
approval. No,
Mm,
I had to get approval to do it. It wasn't something that I could just jam into the auction, because actually the first thing that I got approval to do was to handle cryptocurrency, because obviously that was pivotal. It was really important, and the success of the sale was contingent on the fact that we were able to handle crypto. So I had to get permission to do that. So went through all of the convoluted bureaucratic hoops to get that approved. And once I knew that we could handle ETH, I didn't even know that it was abbreviated as ETH at that point in time. I had no idea really what the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin was even. But in any case, eventually they said yeah, and we were very excited to test the waters of crypto. I think that obviously a lot of top clients in the contemporary category, especially at Christie's, are tangentially or directly interested in the crypto space. So that was actually the selling point for management to get NFTs through and over the finish line was, hey, this can be a way for us to break into the crypto scene.
amazing. And so at that point in time, when you sort of got that through the line, did you pick up the phone and call Beeple, or actually, how did that process happen? When you sort of say it fell into your lap, was it Beeple and his team reaching out to auction houses?
Oh, we were working with Maker's Place. So Maker's Place, are you familiar with Maker's Place operation?
Yep,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
bought a few
Cool.
things from
So
them. Yeah.
they contacted Christie's first, and introduced us to Mike, and that's how it all worked. We were constantly working, all of us together, but Mike was chosen or contacted by Maker's Place, so that they made the introduction to me and Mike.
Got it. And then, and what was the sort of, your initial thoughts or impressions of Mike when you sort of first met him and he was describing what the
From the
piece of work?
moment I met the dude, I loved him. He's so funny and weird and idiosyncratic and very much the opposite of what I'm used to when it comes to artists in the contemporary art world. Doesn't take himself too seriously. I mean, he's like I think of him as like Honoré Daumier of our times. Honoré Daumier is a famous French satirist from the late 19th century, and it made engravings and prints and stuff. But Mike has a way of disarming you with just how silly he is, and I really enjoyed working with him throughout. I'm proud to call him a friend now. So love
Yeah.
Mike, and his brother Scott. Scott's amazing too.
Yeah, I just bumped into them in Seoul. So, but I sort of, it's pretty amazing. Every single time you meet him at all these events, he's got the same energy level at all times and all of these things. And I'm assuming he must be going to a lot of events, meeting a lot of different people. But he's
Yeah, well, I mean,
always smiling and
he
high energy.
also makes these artworks every single day. It takes a certain person to be able to pull that off. I mean, Mike is super high energy. He's the type of person who can't sit still, really. He's constantly got his fingers in his hair, and he's pulling his hair all over the place and bouncing his legs around. And that uniform that he wears too, looking almost like a stockbroker or something. It's so funny. He's like a man who contains multitudes.
Yeah. And leading up to the auction, as the specialist, what price tag were you sort of putting on it?
Oh, we literally. So this is another thing where we had to get permission to do it. This is a bit inside baseball, but in art at auction, if you're not publishing a range, if you're not saying, for example, this is $1 to $2 million, and this is $50,000 to $70,000, then you'll say something like the estimate is on request, which is supposed to signal like if you have to ask, it's too expensive for you, almost. But if you're legally obliged, like if somebody requests the estimate, you're legally obliged to give it to them. But that estimate is usually reserved for the $50 to $70 million thing. In this instance, I got permission from the legal department to publish estimate unknown, and we'd never done that before. So instead of estimate on request, it wasn't a published range. It was estimate unknown. And I felt that that was a fun winking nod to estimate on request, but also the least pretentious way that we could have this sale, to run the sale without a published estimate. And we started the bid at $100. So I was going to be, if we had sold that thing for $1 million, I would have been elated. I would have been super, super giddy and proud and happy and would have just gone on with my life as a contemporary art specialist. But yeah, we opened the bidding at $100, and within 8 minutes of the sale kicking off, we were at $1 million. So we had, and to keep in mind, like people forget about this part, that auction went on for 14 days. I hardly remember what those 14 days were like. I only vividly remember the first 8 minutes and the last 8 minutes.
Why was it 14 days? Was the clock reset after a bid was beaten, or?
No, that's just, so like I said, with contemporary art at auction, you're drawing on all the previous instances that you sold contemporary art at auction. So with online sales, we have all this rich trove of data that indicates the sweet spot for running an online auction is 2 weeks. You want it open for 2 weeks of bidding. This is for traditional art, right? You're putting art up on the wall for people to come and see it. It's on display at Christie's. People need time to get their finances in order. You don't want it to be a spasm. You don't want it to be this brief window. Whereas with crypto and NFTs, of course, the opposite is true. Like you don't, but a 14-day auction is a death sentence. That the attention span is so much shorter because crypto native people are so different from the contemporary art collector, the average contemporary art collector, and the stats bear that out too. When it breaks down, when you're looking at the people who participated in the Beeple auction, of course, they're decades younger on average than the average contemporary art collector. There were almost 50 people who placed bids. 20 people of those 50 bid above $1 million. And of the total almost 50 people who bid, only 3 were previously known clients. So think about that. I mean, that's kind of extraordinary that you never see. I don't know if we will ever see those kind of stats for an auction again, a contemporary art auction again. And I think that in and of itself is a compelling reason to drop what you're doing and focus. If you're in contemporary art, focus on the opportunities that are presenting themselves in crypto and NFTs. There's something happening here. There's a groundswell. There's more excitement and there's more vitality in this space than in any other sector of the art market, full stop.
Yeah. Did you know how special Mike was in January 21? Because that would have been super early, and I sort of felt like the $69 million sale put people on everybody's map.
I had no idea. I honestly had no idea. You know, I learned quickly about what he was doing. I learned that he had been doing this for more than a decade, 13 years plus and going, making an artwork every single day. But it wasn't my field. I'm specialized in the very pretentious and very I don't know what's the right word, competitive world of contemporary art. And I hadn't heard of Beeple or Mike Winkelmann before working with him. And that was really refreshing and amazing. But it felt very alien to me. The entire experience was very alien and scary in a way. Of course, for the most part, I find that stuff pretty inspirational and I'm a great lover of chaos. So like that was a breath of fresh air almost, but it's still, there were times where I felt completely overwhelmed and like I knew nothing at all. That's when I joined the CryptoPunks Discord. My first username there was Noah the Poser. And that I chose that name out of a sense of feeling very, very, very much an outsider who didn't know what he was doing and wanted to be honest about that.
Yeah. Wow. This is a historical moment in time, not only for Christie's, but for NFTs, right? I think everybody always remembers that, and that absolutely put NFTs on the map in some ways. How does that make you feel? Like, are you, is that sort of hit home for you at any one point in time? Like you're part of a pretty big part of history for NFTs.
I don't know. It makes me a little uncomfortable, honestly. I don't want to dispute it because I know, it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal the next day, but it makes me uncomfortable. And at the moment, I definitely felt this really searing spotlight swing to me and what I'd just done, right? Like when the sale ended, I was alone in an office at Christie's. Nobody else was there. Now I was watching the sale close on this brick of a laptop that Christie's had assigned to me. And when the sale ended, when it closed finally, and it was definitely over, I closed my laptop and I saw that my phones, because I had a couple at the time, Christie's phone, personal phone, that kind of thing. they were all exploding and blowing up. And I just closed the laptop, I closed the door to the office, and I walked around the floor of the contemporary art department. It's just totally empty. And I was just thinking to myself, like, dude, what the fuck have you done? You know, this is gonna totally absorb your life now. Like, you're gonna get sucked into this world. And I didn't know then if I wanted to truly stick around and be a part of it. And so, yeah, sure. I guess historical in the sense that it changed the trajectory of the art market, the financial dimension of the art market for a good couple of years, and we're still living through that disruption. But on a personal level, it was just really monumental for me. So it's hard for me to look at it outside of the perspective of just my perspective. I can't believe that it is historical. That's basically, if I could just put it in a short, succinct, catchy way of describing it. I just can't believe that it even happened.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat too, and I'm privileged to actually even have a conversation with you, which is really cool. And just hearing firsthand like how it all went down. No, so and I think we didn't even talk about the artwork, but could you just describe the actual Beeple piece, just in a couple of sentences in terms of what it was and why it was special?
Yeah, sure. Well, I talked a little bit about Duchamp earlier, but Duchamp famously popularized this notion that the ready-made could be art, right? You take something that already exists and you skew it, you turn it on its side, and even the most humble urinal can be this high artwork, this regarded thing. So I was looking at Mike's Instagram and proposed to him that we essentially tokenize the grid of the Instagram. Take that as his entire body of work. I mean, he had agency here too, right? It wasn't like I came up with this idea. Like I can't say exactly how we landed on it, but I can tell you this: what we started with, Mike wanted to sell a one of one of his 5,000th every day, and so that every day was pinned on his Twitter for a very long time. I don't think it's pinned there anymore, but the 5,000th every day is a self-portrait of Mike drawing, and behind him is like, as a child, self-portrait of Mike as a child. And behind him, there are all these characters drawn from his work, like Buzz Lightyear with tits and like Pikachu vomiting, or like Kim Jong-un, doing something really gross. I don't know. Like, I can't even tell you because I've kind of sublimated it, but he wanted to tokenize that as a one of one and have that be the piece that we sold. And I was like, Mike, that's not going to work for Christie's. Like, we're going to have to make this a little bit more palatable for our in the art world crowd. So we decided to tokenize his entire career basically as a one of one. So it treats Mike's everyday series up until that point as a sort of ready-made artwork. And that was interesting to me. Like, that felt really compelling. And there was a raison d'etre for the NFT too. Like, there was a clear reason why it needed to exist. And I don't know. It just felt easier to sell it, and it also felt like a more compelling artwork at the end of the day.
Absolutely, and I mean, it's life's work, right? I mean, 5,000 days, all in a massive sort of collage. Definitely a beautiful sort of story behind it.
Yeah, and it just taken as an abstract artwork. Like, if you squint at it, if you're not zooming into the picture, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, you can see the full spectrum of colors that Mike uses, and even his kind of evolution as an artist is apparent from a glance. So I was delighted when he finally set through the 5,000 collaged everydays. I knew instantly that was going to be a hit.
That's amazing. You know what's even more amazing is the fact that Mike is a high caliber artist now and has a piece like this that's down in the record books, but he's also now a CryptoPunk.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And I think that must speak volumes of the CryptoPunk sort of collection as well in some ways, right?
Totally. Yeah. I also sort of helped a little bit suggesting punks for Mike to take a look at. I sent him that clown punk that he wound up bidding on and buying. But yeah, I feel like it's a perfect punk for him. I'm so glad that he chose the clown, because Mike is the court jester in a ways of NFTs, but he's also the king. And when the king is the jester, that should tell you something about the court, right? Like that is a very interesting kingdom. So
Absolutely. And so after sort of Beeple, that really kicked off another wave of NFTs at Christie's for you, and I think I'm just trying to weave in another conversation with a punkcaster, Barcella, who basically had the full set of the art box curated that sort of went up. What was your sort of involvement in that, and how did you sort of transition to sort of Gen Art, and how did you make sense of Gen Art at that time?
Yeah, I'm really grateful to Barcella for trusting me. I met Barcella in the CryptoPunks Discord. I joined the Punks Discord in order to market and sell the punks that Matt and John consigned to our evening sale. So we sold 9 punks, including an alien, in the contemporary art evening sale in May of 2021. And that was my entree to Discord and to the CryptoPunks community. And so had a deep well of respect for punks already. Very early on, I learned that CryptoPunks are these venerated kind of veterans, right, of the space. A lot of them have been around for a long time. They're the OGs, as it were. And they are the monolith PFP collection, but they're more than that. It's this community of thinkers and builders and idea makers, tinkerers, like that kind of thing. And Barcella and I met in Punk's Discord, and then started having conversations tangential conversations about art blocks and his collection. And eventually we decided that it would be a good thing to put up for auction, to try at auction, because it was the first major art blocks collection to come up for sale. It was at a time when art blocks were running and everyone was really excited about generative art. Ultimately, I think, that was the first failure that I experienced in NFTs. We didn't sell that lot. And I learned so much from the experience. And by all means, Barcella could have walked away from that experience with me and held a grudge and been angry that we didn't sell it. And it was embarrassing and painful for everyone involved. You feel terrible, by the way, when something doesn't go right at auction. It's only 20% of the time, right? If you look at auctions historically, it's like 80% of the lots sell. But the 20% that doesn't, in a good sale, in a good sale. In a bad sale, it could be as bad as like 50-50. But the 20% that don't sell, you feel terrible. And this was a high profile sale, and I walked away from it feeling very like battered and bruised and like beaten almost. But working with Barcella was amazing. This is, again, very, very not archetypal Christie's client. A younger person like me who has a weird story, how they arrived in this space, and a collecting acumen and a journey that's kind of unique. So it was fun. It was fun to work with them. That was the first, also beyond Matt and John, first CryptoPunk I did any real business with.
Oh, nice. Yeah, but Barcella's got an amazing story too, and such a good dude. It's such a super fascinating story, and I think definitely put art blocks on the map in some ways. I sort of feel like at that time, in that sort of era, the first half of 2021, I think the thing was, if there was an inkling that a collection would be going to Christie's or Sotheby's, the floor price would automatically sort of jump, and I think that would almost validate any sort of collections at that time, right? So I think CryptoPunks going to Christie's was a huge thing, right? So I guess what you guys sort of did there was pretty amazing for punks too, just to put on the roadmap, sort of say it's only serious pieces that get auctioned off at these big name auction houses, right?
Yeah, and that wasn't lost on me, by the way. Like there was the sense of responsibility going into that auction, and how much was at stake, especially because I admired CryptoPunks. Already I admired these people so much, and I saw that they'd built this community up from nothing, right? People had stuck around, and it caught fire and it exploded. And it was my job to make sure that the fireworks display didn't blow up in our face, right? And to a certain extent, it was like, shit, I mean, I don't want these to sell for $100 million and totally overheat the market and it goes crazy, but I also don't want them to sell for nothing. And worst case scenario, I don't want them to not sell at all. So it felt almost like I was damned, to fail to a certain extent. I walked away from that auction thinking, this is great. We just sold these for $17 million or whatever the hammer price was in that environment. But apparently, I wasn't there. Obviously, I was bidding on the phone in the room. But I know that at the party at Super Chief Gallery in Brooklyn, where they were streaming the auction, people booed, and they walked down. So, I mean, the expectations were just the adrenaline and all that. Like the excitement was intense. But I think as we all know, the people who've been around throughout the bull market and now the prolonged, boring bear market, we all know that sometimes the expectation, the FOMO, and the human emotion that gets injected into these things is not always healthy.
Absolutely, for sure. It was getting a little bit toxic for sometimes too. So yeah, it's got to be balanced a little bit. And then I guess just in terms of through this whole process, I think you're more focused on immersing yourself in the digital art space, more from an auctioneer sort of side. But were you sort of dabbling into NFTs yourself? Like, were you buying? Were you sort of experimenting on the side? I guess what was your first NFT basically?
Okay, so I bought my first Ethereum and Bitcoin in, I think, in April of that year. So a month before the punk sale, more or less. And I was just so busy at the time, I barely had any chance to like do research into these things and actually figure out how it all works. So I did that via Coinbase. And after the first major dump, I sold all of my Bitcoin for a loss. I held on to ETH. But I started trading in altcoins as well, or quote unquote altcoins, was buying Solana and Cardano and things like that. But I didn't buy my first NFT until that summer. A couple months later, I bought a Mooncat. So the Mooncat was my first NFT, my first flip for a modest profit. And I also bought a Deadfellas, which was my first PFP that I used. So shout out Deadfellas. Like I bought it at like 0.17, and then I think I bought my Spotty for like 0.3 or something. And I sold a couple of Deadfellas for profits too along the way. That was when I was learning how to actually play NFTs, right? Because I think of NFTs as a game too, and in addition to being something that you can collect, and there is this financial dimension to it. It's really, really fun and exciting. And the fact that you can trade seamlessly and organically, right, from the palm of your hand, like all of that's really magical. And in order to understand this market, you do have to kind of play in it too, I think. To be a good salesperson, you have to be somebody who participates in the market. So that's not necessarily true of art at auction, but I definitely think it's true of NFTs. So yeah, it wasn't until the summer of 2021 that I really started collecting and flipping. And yeah, that was around the time when my friends experienced loot. I missed out on loot. Sadly, I didn't. I think it was way over my head at the time, but also I was just too busy. And I feel like I left the Discord server for a couple days, and I came back, and then everyone had loot, and they were selling it for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Anyway, not salty at all about missing loot. But anyway, that's where it all started, the summer of 21. And also Cryptodes too. Cryptodes was the first mint that I attempted to participate in. So
amazing. So yeah, crypto's sort of pumped at that sort of stage too, right? I mean, did you get in on the mint on that?
Toads took a while. Toads took a while to take off. But yeah, I by nature of being in the Punks Discord, and everybody in the Punks Discord at the time, everyone knew who was working on Cryptodes, because that's where it kind of it started, right? The seed was planted in Punks. And I also regard Cryptodes as the purest and the best CryptoPunks derivative that exists, which probably is controversial, and there will be people who get upset about that. Yeah, no, Toads are the Punks derivative. They're the best Punks derivative to my mind. But I'm proud to say that I'm friends with the people who made Cryptodes. So that was the first mint where it was people I knew who were involved, and people who I really liked. And it was amazing to see the excitement around Cryptodes early on, and then really kind of terrifying and shocking later on, further down the line when they pumped above 10 ETH. I was worried, and rightly worried at the time. Like, this is clearly a mania. It's overheated. This is nuts. I sold a couple of Toads in like the 4 ETH range, but anytime you get above 10, I think that's really dangerous for PFP collections. And so I kind of assumed that it would crash back down to the real world. But I was proud still of Gremplin and the entire team, everybody on the team that made Toads possible, because they're important. They really are important. They're symbolic too of what community actually can do. And I think the no roadmap, no promises, CC0 ethos is very crypto, like super, super crypto and inspirational. And I took a lot of cues from Toads too when I finally launched my own product, my own project with Howlers. So without CryptoPunks, there's no Cryptodes. Without Cryptodes, there's no Howlers. Without it's a continuum, right, or a spectrum of these projects. And I think the best projects are always in dialogue with something that came before.
How did you get into the Punks Discord? Did you buy a Punk early on, or did you just?
Oh no, I was broke, dude. I was like, I was basically broke throughout 2021, early 2021. So I was invited by Justin Aversano, and love Justin. Shout out Justin, I love you, buddy. And he really encouraged me to get active in there, and I was very hesitant to do it because at the time I didn't have any social media presence. I had an Instagram account that I just used to follow, dank meme pages, but I didn't post like pictures of my brunch or whatever it is that people use Instagram for traditionally. I didn't do that. I didn't follow people who did that. So I was very hesitant to get on to Discord, but I did. Justin invited me, and then I started meeting people like Shuli and Gremlin and C and Cry and Trill and all these cool people who inspired me, and that kind of was when it all really started to take root, and I started to realize the potential for crypto and NFTs beyond just art and profiteering and the decentralized market. There's all this community too. There's these exciting people who potentially can collaborate with each other and build new things. And that's when it all kind of clicked.
Mm. How did you meet Justin? I met him here recently in Hong Kong. We just had a few drinks together with some other punks, but he's a cool dude. But how did you get onto Justin?
You know what? That's a great question. I actually don't really, I think through G Money, maybe. It just sort of happened, like when all this stuff was blowing up, I kind of, like I said, kicked the hornet's nest almost. And it doesn't sound right to call them hornets because people are really kind in the NFT space. And I've experienced more generosity in NFTs than I have in any other community or space that I belong to in my life. And I grew up playing in punk rock bands in LA. So like the DIY punk scene doesn't even come close to the generosity and the warmth that you feel in NFTs and crypto. But so Justin and I kind of met at some point early on, right? And he was the one who started singing to me the gospel of CryptoPunks. And he was a punk at the time. And so, yeah, he invited me into the CryptoPunks Discord.
So was that before or after the Christie's CryptoPunk auction? So had you been aware
that was
of
before?
punks?
Yeah, it was before. So it was when I was considering putting one into a sale. And so really the impetus for me joining was not like, oh, I'm going to be a member of the CryptoPunks community and like hang out. It was like, I'm going to find somebody to sell these CryptoPunks to, right? Like it didn't start from a wholesome, generous place. I think that the art world working in art at auction in New York City for a long time kind of jaded me and made me very focused on goals, right? And accomplishments. Like I was very fixated on getting a great price for the punks, right? It was a selfish thing. And then when I got there, I joined with Noah the Poser as my handle because I had a chip on my shoulder. That chip was very quickly filled in. Like I realized that this was a crowd of people who I had a lot more in common with. It wasn't like the traditional art collecting crowd where I felt totally alienated from them. Like, let's be clear, the profile of somebody collecting contemporary art at Christie's, again, is just very different from the average NFT collector or the average crypto enthusiast. And I just realized that I had a lot more in common with this new crowd, and it was through punks.
Mm. Nice. And I mean, you're sort of lucky in some ways to have just stumbled into the punks. I mean, of all the discords that are out there, you just sort of happen to stumble into punks, which are, I guess, a little bit more purist and art focused and just general curious and nerdy about this sort of stuff, right? Because I wouldn't imagine
luck is the foundation of this whole story. Everything we're talking about, everything that's happened to me since 2021, it's all built on luck, which is kind of absurd. Again, I keep on saying that word absurd. I'm probably overusing it at this point, but luck is everything, I think, in this world at least.
Totally. And your punk purchase, when did you buy that? Like, and what sort of led you to ultimately sort of buy your your punk?
After Howlers, I immediately reinvested in the NFT space. You know, I had made a tweet in 2021 at some point saying to the effect of like, I'm manifesting this. I'm going to be able to buy a punk at some point. I believe, even though I just said everything's based on luck, I also believe in manifestation. I think you kind of manifest your destiny, right? To a certain extent. It's corny, but I do believe that's real. And so I put that energy out there, and it was kind of a commitment to say, when I can, I'm going to buy it. You know, I'm going to, by any means necessary, I'm going to be able to join this community and really be a part of this space. Like that was an emblem of how much I believed in this shit. And so when Howlers sold out, that weekend, the first weekend after Howlers sold out, when I had the capital to do it, I bought a CryptoPunk.
Nice. And so 2099 was your first and only CryptoPunk?
Yep, so far. Yeah, so far. I don't think I will ever sell him. I don't know. Don't plan to, but for now, it's the only one I own, and I hope to hold it forever. I hope to always have a punk at least.
No, he's a cool dude. He's albino, handlebars, and headband.
Yeah.
How are you thinking? How are you thinking through traits at the time? Were you looking at different types of traits, and how did you end up with this guy?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, I'm looking at what's available, and at the time, I wasn't very sophisticated, and I didn't want to attempt to put a bid on something and then get sniped by a bot or something. Like we can, it's a bit inside baseball, but punks know that there's been problems with the app for a long time when it comes to placing bids and buying punks. So I was aware of that. So I just bought what I thought looked good at the time. I wasn't thinking about an investment. I even, my wife is standing at my side, and I told her, you know, are you sure that I can do this? Because this is basically throwing this money away. Like I'm gonna own this thing forever. And she said, yeah, sure, honey, go ahead. But I chose 2099 because he just looks so punky. Like he is not a pretty aesthetic punk. He's kind of a sleazy, weird guy punk. Like and those are the best punks for me. I think cleaner punks where the attributes are in harmony and they have a personality that is not necessarily squeaky clean, but also not too dissonant and overloaded and weird. But I think generally speaking, general rule of thumb, the more disconcerting maybe a punk is at first glance, the better.
Yeah. No, well, he's definitely a cool looking punk, man, and I think you've definitely made the headband yours.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Which is super cool. I mean, and then so let's talk a little bit about your transition into Yuga. So did you get the punk before Yuga, or how did that sort of transition sort of happen?
Before. So I think for a good, I don't know, it feels like 6 months, but it could have been just a couple of months. But I think a good chunk of time passed before Yuga reached out, and I was still running auctions at Christie's, and I had recently launched the Howlers project, right? And then I had reasonable amount of success with that. Actually, really great amount of success, and that was such an amazing experience working on Howlers and making all the art and being the founder and lead of this new community while I'm still running the show at Christie's. But that was when Yuga Pressure was months after the CryptoPunk purchase, and while Howlers was still ongoing.
Gotcha. And man, you've done quite a fair bit of stuff at Yuga as well that has made the punk community super proud. Finally getting us into some well-known museums where punks belong, such as the Pompidou and RCA Miami. Like, what was the sort of process to get through that, and what was the sort of thinking behind that?
Okay, great. This is my favorite thing that I got to work on with CryptoPunks. So I was always as an art person, as somebody who comes from the old art world, I was always very aware that with NFTs we had sort of leapfrogged over the traditional markers of the merit for art before art usually arrives at auction. So what I mean by that is when Mike's piece sold for $69 million, when the Everydays went for $69 million, he became the third most expensive living artist at auction without ever having had a traditional gallery show, without ever having been in a museum collection or even in a museum exhibition. And so we were left with these kind of gaps in the DNA. And for a lot of people looking at crypto and NFTs from the outside and from the skeptical position as somebody from the old art world, they're wondering, well, how is this thing selling for so much money? And they haven't been in museums and they haven't been in these important exhibitions. So it was a bit of going back in time and kind of trying to fill in the gaps. And seeing how museums respond to this stuff too, it's kind of a litmus test for how forward-looking they are. And I was surprised to find just how amenable and open and thoughtful a lot of institutions are when it comes to this space. Because crypto, let's be honest, I mean, we have a massive PR problem, and this has been compounded now. It's very different now compared to where it was in early 2022, right? But it's now almost taboo. So the institutions that can see beyond the negative headlines and the kind of dark side, the underbelly of crypto, and can see the utility, and that word has been totally eviscerated of any meaning now because of NFTs, but the utility of it and the utopian potential for this stuff, like those are the institutions who I want to have conversations with. And I'm excited that I got to work with the ICA Miami and the Centre Pompidou and other museums, and hopefully more museums. It'll become clear, where we're going with this kind of saga soon. But there are a lot of institutions out there who are looking at this space with a kind of thoughtful and not critical, not skeptical eye. I mean, look at the MoMA. Look at Rafik Anadol's success in the lobby of the MoMA that unsupervised has been extended 6 or 7 times. So museums understand. They're starting to get it, and they better get it quick.
Yeah, Rafik stuff's amazing. But these punks that as well, I was just curious as well. So I think in Pompidou, the CryptoPunk that was selected was Punk110, female, earring, mohawk, pink lipstick, cigarette. And then in the ICA, it's Punk305, iconic one, blonde and VR. What was the thought process around selecting these particular punks? I mean, was there much discussion around curating these for these particular sort of museums?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when Yuga acquired CryptoPunks and Meebits from Matt and John, they also got in excess of 400 punks from Larva Labs wallet. These are dev punks that had really never moved before. So really prestigious punks to own. And what I did was to go through and pick out those that made sense for museum collections. I had something like 10 or 15 punks that I thought would be good to see in museum collections, and got approval to be able to offer these to museums. Then went out of my way to find people at the museums who I needed to talk to and have discussions with and kind of interview them, right, to see if they were the right fit for punks. And Miami was top of mind because that's where the founders of Yuga are from. And Punk305 just happened to be in my selection, right? Like it is the area code for Miami. And Greg Solano at Yuga was the first to point this out. Like this is an amazing opportunity for ICA Miami to give them Cryptopunk305. And so that's the one we offered to Miami. They said yes, and it was a pleasure to work with them. And the exhibition that we put together too to celebrate the donation was so fun. But for Pompidou, we offered them a different punk actually, and they went ahead and they said, well, we'd actually like to we really like 110, and so we said sure, why not?
I love the fact that they picked one out with a cigarette. No bias here at all.
We offer, honestly, I don't remember exactly which one we offered, but we did offer them a very similar punk, and it did have a cigarette. So to be totally honest, like we started from the place of cigarette. They just wanted a different specific cigarette.
Gotcha. And the one in ICA is kind of cool, right? Because it's situated right next to a Warhol piece. Again, with an American lady, blonde American lady, look in some ways quite similar, right? Sitting next to each other.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. And that painting was actually only there for the exhibition. It was loaned specifically for the occasion from an important collection too, an important contemporary art collection in New York. So I was able to get the owner to agree to loan the painting expressly for the event,
Gotcha.
for the unveiling, as it were. But the reason we chose that picture is very significant. I am always going to regard crypto and NFTs through the lens of somebody who cares about contemporary art and the continuum, right? The story of contemporary art. And I look at this specific series by Warhol, the Society Portraits, and I consider those the proto PFP, right? Like that series of paintings. And I think this for multiple reasons, but the most important here is that the Society Portraits, they're always the same format. They always depict the sitter from the shoulders up in profile or kind of askew in a pose, but it's always just focused on their face and their shoulders. And they're always square format. So 40 by 40 inches, the standard size for these pictures. And they're rendered in these vivid, beautiful colors. And they're painted using an almost machine-like technique of screen printing and then overpainting with brush and acrylic or vice versa. And so there's this kind of like mechanical reproduction to it that reminds me of NFTs or minting NFTs. But they also depict typically the owners, right? The people who commission these portraits, they're represented in the portraits. So the Society Portraits, for me, having one of those hanging in your living room in the 80s, that the 2021 to 2023 and beyond equivalent is owning a CryptoPunk and having it as your PFP on the internet.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I think when they sort of sit next to each other like that, I think you're right. I mean, maybe Warhol was seeing it way before CryptoPunks as well, and it's sort of nice to see them sit next to each
it's
other.
impossible to deny when you in the art world. They're kind of pretentious about it. They say, "Oh, we're putting a piece in dialogue with another one." We're trying to create a conversation or whatever. And maybe that's more or less what we were doing, but I don't think of it as a conversation so much as an invitation to the people who are looking at the art to think about what these two things have in common. And there's obviously so much to dig into when it comes to this specific painting, The American Lady, Kay Forson by Warhol from the 70s, and CryptoPunk number 305 by Matt and John from 2017.
Super cool. It's another side question too. And I remember Invader was here, sort of pixel artist that does pixel art in buildings in real life. Did you have anything to do with that at all? Like he just I sort of found like he was doing punks in streetscapes in Paris.
Yes and no. Yeah, yes, I was definitely in dialogue with Invader, and I got to meet him at a certain point. But he was doing it of his own accord. What I found with Invader, and what I admire about Invader, was that Invader's going to do what Invader wants to do. So there was no leading a horse to water and forcing the horse to drink kind of dynamic there. If he wanted to put up punks, he's going to do it of his own accord. It wasn't something where definitely there was no monetary agreement or contract involved or anything like that. And I was excited when I started to see Invader put up punks around Paris. And it was around the same time that we were talking to the Pompidou, and it all kind of just worked out this way, and I think Invader was mostly responding to the aesthetics of CryptoPunks and his dialogue, as it were, with pop culture and symbols from pop culture. But it makes sense. It makes sense that he would be interested in this kind of subculture of crypto and NFTs, because he's a radical street artist, a person who thrives in that kind of outlaw milieu. And there's something resonant there with CryptoPunks and crypto generally speaking. So yeah, I was thrilled to see it when he started putting punks up around Paris. And I love that there's a zombie punk in Les Halles right nearby the Pompidou now, where there's a currently CryptoPunk 110 is on the wall. And there's 3 Invader punks in the very close cityscape of Paris.
That's so dope. Hopefully, we can get one in every major capital city around the world at some stage. But make sure if you speak to him again, make sure 9527 is on that list.
It's on his head. Well, he put up? I think he put up Axio, thinking hotels, CryptoPunk. But it's so funny. He didn't ask permission to do any of this stuff. So it's just like randomly somebody's punk would just wind up on the wall in Paris, and they'd be like, "Hey, that's my punk."
That's super cool. Oh man, what a ride at Yuga, and sort of see that you're getting it all up for fatherhood, which is an amazing thing, and congratulations on that.
Thank you, boss. Yeah, I'm very excited. I couldn't be more excited about. I'm speaking to you from the nursery right now, so I'm looking at his crib. He's coming any day now, any minute now. Could be any second. So we're due on the 19th. It's like it's very close. 7 days.
Amazing. This is your first?
My first, yeah.
Nice. I can imagine you won't be getting much sleep very soon. So enjoy
No,
it
but I
while you
haven't
can.
been. You know, I think I feel like I'm preparing for it in a way. Like my body is subconsciously preparing me to be sleep deprived. I just keep on waking up every couple of hours in the night. And I think it's just me subconsciously preparing for the next kind of 6 months. I'll be excited. I'll be very excited for this.
Excellent. And are you kicking off Howlers again? And maybe if you can just sort of share with everybody what Howlers is, because I've had a look at it. It's a pretty cool project.
So Howlers, man, let's get into it. So Howlers, I started drawing in late 2021, like around December is when I really in earnest started drawing the collection. I had the silhouette and the vague concept for the collection outlined since the fall. I came up with it, in Discord, like hanging out with friends and some friends who worked on cryptodes. We were bouncing ideas off of each other, and I wanted to call the collection Rare Wolves at first. And of course, after I came up with that idea, Rare Wolves, I bought the ENS and everything. I registered the ENS, and then somebody dropped a collection called Rare Wolves like 2 weeks later. So I'm actually glad that it happened that way because Howlers is such a better name. But I started drawing Howlers because I realized I had this opportunity that I probably was never going to have again in my life to be an artist. And some people are going to hear this and scoff or cringe or whatever because they're like, oh, well, PFPs aren't art or this kind of thing is not art. And I have a much looser definition when it comes to what constitutes art. It's informed by having been in the art space for a long time, but it's also just kind of a personal conviction that I have. Like anything, if the artist says so, it's art, right? And I think of PFPs as this kind of niche subculture of art, maybe, but it is definitely art with a capital A. So I sat down to draw Howlers, and my goal was to make a PFP collection where every aspect of it would be something I delighted in, right? Like it was a way of work, like making work that didn't feel like work. It was like totally play. Because up until that point, I mean, it was fun to sell NFTs for Christie's, but ultimately I was selling NFTs for Christie's. I wasn't selling NFTs for myself. I was in the sense that it was my career and I was benefiting from it. It was learning from it. I wanted to do it, but it wasn't my industry. It wasn't for me. And there was something very freeing about working on Howlers and feeling like I could draw whatever I want. I'm the master of this project's destiny. And so I just drew from the traditions, the visual traditions that are really important to me. I'm talking about traditional tattooing, American traditional tattooing. I'm a great collector of tattoos. So I've got full coverage now from my knees up to my neck and not including my hands or my butt cheeks so far. But one day, maybe. But everything else is covered in tattoos. So I love the style of American tattooing and also Russian and French tattooing. So drawing from that, from 1930s cartooning, so really early Disney cartoons, that kind of thing. The style of Cartoon Goons, basically, I love that. Or Cuphead. I think they call it like hose and something, like a garden hose, and there's something else. There's a style of animation. Tony Babel does this really well too. The artist Tony Babel. But so Howlers was my kind of love letter to these different traditions that had always been inspirational to me. And it was my way of saying, like, proving true all the things that I had been saying about Web3, like how it gives creators agency and how it gives you a chance to break out of the system. And, the way things are usually done with intermediary and middlemen doesn't have to be that way anymore, because with NFTs, you can take control of your own destiny. And with crypto, you can be your own boss. And so all of that was at play. Howlers was no promises, no roadmap, CC0, very much inspired by Toads. And when it sold out and when it performed really well, at first on the secondary market, at first, right? Everything comes down to earth and back to reality at a certain point. I felt a responsibility then to carry it somewhere, right? Like I had landed the pass, like I had the ball, and now I got to run with it. So we very quickly, as a community, the people who were lucky enough to mint or to buy it on secondary, we made a Discord. The community actually made the Discord, and then I just designated it the official Discord. And we very quickly came up with a roadmap together for the subsequent 2 collections and the game that we ran. But basically, Howlers was followed by a companion collection called Prey, which was airdropped. It was animals of prey that wolves would normally eat. And then there was a combined to mint, burn to mint opportunity for the Champions collection, where if you had Prey and a Howler and you combined them, you fed your Prey to your Howler, you would get a champion. And then you could stake the champion in a tournament, in a March Madness style tournament that was happening on chain. So it was very ambitious, super ambitious project. But within a year, we pulled it off. I can't overstate how proud I am that we finished that story, and how grateful I am also to Yuga for letting me finish Howlers, because this was always my baby. It was my first baby. And now I'm expecting a real flesh baby. But Howlers was my first experience really being like a father. So getting to finish that, seeing it through from start to finish, even though there were no promises to begin with, it was an amazing journey, really.
It's amazing to sort of hear you transition that, and it's in some ways inspirational to hear that you were able to pull it off too, right? I think for all those sitting on the sidelines wanting to always do something and not sort of doing it, and you actually did it. And I'm just looking at
it
the
was
artwork
terrifying too. I should say, like, it was. I've been trying to underscore that throughout. Like, I want everyone just listening, if you think that it sounds like, oh, it's just so like easy, like this guy just got really lucky, it was also really terrifying. Like going out there and putting yourself out there and being exposed to everybody's expectations, and then having to live up to it, all that stuff it's not really that easy. You can't phone it in. It doesn't all boil down to luck. Like if you're feeling like you're unlucky, whatever, and you that's insurmountable. Like if you go out of your way to just put in the work and make it happen, that goes a long way too. It's not just luck. Yes, luck is foundational and fundamental to all this stuff, but it is true that you can make your own luck as well.
No, absolutely. I can just imagine. I mean, like even I'm not sort of anywhere remotely close to an artist or anything of significant caliber, but just putting these podcasts out, it's vulnerable, right? Just to sort of hear people talk and putting your sort of voice out there. But so I can just imagine what it's like for artists and just showing them, it's a bit of an insight to how you think and what you sort of view.
Yeah,
as,
even
cool,
shitty,
right?
even like shitty rug pull PFP NFTs, like that still takes a lot of effort to put it together. It's not something that's just like super cut and paste and easy. Like, let me tell you, you have to know a little bit about coding. You have to know how to draw first and foremost, unless you're like employing a fiber artist, fine. But if you're going to make a PFP collection out of dust and do it yourself, it's not an easy task. So I have an immense amount of respect for people who found projects. It's a very ambitious thing to do. It's also a very foolish thing to do. But as I said earlier on, like with art, the most foolish endeavors are often the most fulfilling.
Yeah, man. And I gotta say, man, I think it's very punk as well, right? I think, as we sort of look across all the punks that I've interviewed as well, everyone's always building, creating, being entrepreneurial, experimenting and curious. And I think,
shoot your shot, right? Like that's the message. That's the CryptoPunks ethos in a nutshell, is like, just take the risk, Like, make sure, be smart about it, be calculated and careful, and use your toolkit that you've built up. Be an expert. Don't be an idiot. It's not just pure degeneracy. Like, you can't just long the coin at 50x leverage. Like, that's not the CryptoPunk way. Frankly, like, there's something more thoughtful about it. Like, we tend to be builders and to be interested in that kind of pursuit. So yeah,
Totally. And so what's next for Howlers? Like,
so ostensibly the project is over because the tournament ended, but nothing is really over, and NFTs are forever. And so I've got some time on my hands. And I've never in my life not been making stuff. I've always, if it wasn't writing songs, it was producing music. If it wasn't producing music, it was making drawings or making paintings, writing poetry or short works of fiction, things like that. Dabbling even in like movie scripts and stuff. But now I'm back to drawing, so I'm definitely working on something. Can't really get more specific about it, but there might be a new chapter on the horizon. I always love a challenge, and so the idea that the PFP is like a dead end now, that there's no kind of future for PFPs, that feels very punk rock to me as well. I think of like the Sex Pistols, no future, and that idea that you're at the end, the terminus of culture. That's also a potential for a new beginning. So maybe there's a new PFP in the works. I don't know. But I'm messing around with stuff. I'm in the arena trying things, as Seamus Palapia recently, whatever his name is, Seamus Prolapse recently said.
Seamus P. Yeah, I don't know who you're talking about. Awesome. Well, mate, looking forward to seeing what happens next. I sort of love your sort of story so far, and love what you sort of done for punks and how you sort of see punks and pushing the space forward. So definitely be cheering you on for the sidelines.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, man. I'm so grateful to the CryptoPunks community and to people like you who are making this culture richer, right? Just by nature of being in it and making things. So if I could just say like just to have the soundbite in there and to get it off my chest, like, I just love CryptoPunks and the people who are making stuff still and who are sticking around. Like, that's going to set us up for a really bright, beautiful future. So proud to be a CryptoPunk.
Proud to be a CryptoPunk. Here. And on that note, how would you describe punk culture for you?
Very much a celebration of the individual, but the individual doesn't exist without the community too, So I think, to put it succinctly, it's DIY culture with a community. So the spirit is to do it yourself, but what's even more fun than doing it yourself and alone is doing it yourself with other people. So there's a way to have that kind of to carry that multitude, right? To be able to do something on your own, but with your friends. That's CryptoPunks.
Gotcha. Beautifully said. And if money wasn't an issue, what would be your dream punk, do you think?
Oof. Oh man, that's tough. I probably want a zombie. I don't know which exactly. I mean, if I could own any punk, I have a favorite punk. It belongs to Saw. So Saw Punk owns this VR. I don't know the number, but it's an albino VR with wild white hair and pink lipstick.
Yeah, I know
and
the
so
one. That's super cool.
That's my favorite punk. I mean, if I could own any punk, it'd be that one. I don't think I'm cool enough to own that punk, frankly. Like, I associate wild whites with hackers and people who have like tremendous amount of expertise with computers. So people who are crypto native, I think, are wild whites for me. So I don't think I would choose that for myself. I'd probably choose a dopey looking zombie or some other flamboyant but ultimately ugly punk. I like buck teeth punk as well. Buck teeth punks and clown noses. So something silly, doesn't take itself too seriously. But I don't think I have a perfect answer for you off the top of my head.
No, that's cool. I think you mentioned a few traits that that I sort of like as well. I love the Wild White actually.
They're classic, Wild White, and that's how I chose my cryptode as well. Was I thought I'm not cool enough for a Wild White CryptoPunk, but cryptode with the Wild White hair, that feels okay. That feels like I can pull it off.
And do you have a favorite punk or series of punks in the community worth mentioning or giving a shout out to?
Oh, like a favorite person? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I have an immense amount of respect for the mods, and for Matt and John. You know, the people who've been around since the very early days. So Shuli and Dr. Terminus and Ross and Raster and Matt and John and Cry and Trill and he and, you know, people who've been around since the early days and who were active for a long time. Those feel like they're my people. You know, I have immense amounts of respect for them. And for people, you know, when you say who's your favorite punk, like some people who don't even own punks anymore, like I don't think owns any punks at the moment, but he's his collecting acumen, especially when it comes to terraforms, is super admirable. And there are certain people who, once they are punks, once they've owned a CryptoPunk, they're kind of always punks. So hard to answer that question too. But in short, the mods and Matt and John.
The unsung heroes of the Discord for sure.
Yeah, Matt and also Matt and John. Matt and John, honestly, even they don't get enough credit still to this day. I think they were unsung when they were the parents. They were almost like people were rebelling against the parents, right? We were in the like adolescent phase of the CryptoPunks community, and I think we maybe treated Matt and John like absentee fathers or something, but you know, they deserve all of the credit in the world for creating this space, for managing it for so many years, and for just being pioneers. You know, like the Meebits was a massive risk for them too. They launched Meebits, they did the Christie's auction, like all these things helped to get us where we are today. So I don't think Matt and John get enough credit for that. They're amazing, smart people, talented, creative artists.
100% agree. Are you close with them at all? Like, are you in touch with them?
I'm close enough. I mean, I stay in touch with Matt more so than John for whatever reason. But yeah, I really like them a lot. They're good people.
All right, Noah, time to spill the beans. Are they cooking anything up?
I have no fucking clue. I mean, I don't think they made Nakamigos. I don't know. I really don't know. They certainly haven't told me, so I have no idea.
Gotcha. And this might be a bit of a contentious question, but I'm super curious if you'd answer it. But how do you feel about V1 punks?
Oh, I think they're cool. Here's the thing about V1 punks. We have to separate the art from the artist, if you will, because in this instance, the art and the artist, it's not very clear at first glance. I think the artist of V1, if we're thinking about it in those terms, is kind of the community that arrived and promoted them in the early days. Like when V1 started to become a collectible thing, there were a lot of people pushing this narrative that somehow V1s are more important than CryptoPunks. And I think that a lot of the people who were touting this the loudest, were being the most vocal proponents of this idea, also had a very vested financial interest in promoting this idea. Like they wanted V1 punks to be more valuable so that they could dump V1 punks on you. So that made it really hard to love them initially. You know, it also seemed like it was a challenge, like there was something adversarial about V1s with CryptoPunks. It doesn't need to be that way. You know, the way I look at it, these are super cool ephemera from Matt and John's creative process. Matt and John famously made that Discord post where they said, we don't like V1s. You know, I like V1s. I think V1s are cool. But I think some of the most vocal early proponents of V1s weren't so sweet. And certainly there's that baggage attached to them now. But the way I regard them is as ephemera, like important ephemera. I don't mean that in a demeaning sense or like an insulting way. They're important ephemera from Matt and John's creative process. It's like a vintage Michael Jordan rookie card, except his head is on backwards. You know, they were basically broken. They didn't work for the time. And there was a way to fix them without deploying a new contract. And that was the wrapper, right? But that wasn't apparent then. You know, this is 2017. So I don't fault Matt and John at all for replacing the punks. And I think it adds a rich dimension of lore to the story. So I'm cool with V1 punks. I don't particularly feel the need to like collect the V1 version of my punk, or certainly not the Bitcoin version of my punk, which I think has nothing to do with CryptoPunks, really, frankly. But in any case, they are cool ephemera.
Well said. And I think it's nice hearing that from somebody like you, just to sort of say that it's cool in some ways. And it's not to sort of say that V1s should be massively sort of endorsed, but they are part of the story and the journey.
They're part of the story. There should be no animosity. Like, I really don't understand the acrimony. Like, I do to a certain degree, because again, there were a lot of really slimy folks who were loudly promoting this stuff back in the day. But I think if we can get beyond that now, like we're in a bear market of healing, right? I would hope that we can all get beyond these like stupid disputes and all the FOMO and like toxicity of the bull market, and kind of focus on what really matters nowadays. And so that's why it's easier now for me to just say like, yeah, V1s are cool. They're a cool part of the lore and the history of CryptoPunks. But they aren't CryptoPunks. And that's because the artists, what they dictate is the art is what matters. And when Matt and John said that the V2 punks are the real punks, then so be it.
Yeah. And I guess the final question before we sort of wrap up, but where to next for CryptoPunks, do you think, now that you've sort of left Yuga? Are you able to have a view on this?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, I kind of can cheat, because I know what's coming up next, more or less. Set a few things up before I left, so I could feel really comfortable about the destiny. But a lot of the things that are coming. The book is coming, so we're working on a book with Zach Group, the people who made the Virgil Abloh book, Nike Virgil Abloh book for Tashin. Really amazing book that had a lot of commercial success, and I think that people really love this book. We're working with the same designers on a book about CryptoPunks. Matt and John are really deeply involved with that as well, and members of the community like Sean Bonner is the lead archivist involved. So the book is coming. Hopefully more museums are coming. And what happens after that? After 6 months, a year from now, I would be a fool to say that I know what that future looks like. Like, if I've learned anything from being in this space for going on 3 years, two going on 3 years, it's that the people who tell you with any kind of certainty what the future will look like, they are either lying to you or they want to sell you something. And I've worn both of those boots before. I've been somebody who wants to sell you something, and I've been somebody who tells the lie because they want to believe it too. But I'm no longer that person. I can tell you pretty confidently that anyone who is telling you what the future looks like is either lying or wants to sell you something. So don't believe them.
And if you could pass on a message to the next owner of your punk, 2099, what would you like to say to them?
I mean, well, since it may in fact be my unborn son who winds up owning this thing, I'll just say, take good care of him, please. Like, don't look at this thing purely as a financial instrument or an asset. It's so much more than that. And if you're only seeing the bottom line, if you're only thinking about things in terms of floor price and the liquidity in the market, you're missing the point. With CryptoPunks, it's so much more than that. This is a decoder ring for understanding a movement and a moment in online culture, in the history of the internet, that is probably going to wind up being a pivotal one. I can't tell you with all certainty, because I just told you there's no future telling. But I would say just take care of him, because punks are special. It's not something that you can just toss around. I've always hated to see people bat them around like they're worthless in a way. Like, at the same time, they can be worthless and priceless, right? Like, priceless implies that they're worthless. But when they wound up on Blur and the people were just batting them back and forth, that was the worst couple weeks of my tenure in the NFT space. I felt more cynical and pessimistic than I ever felt before. But yeah, just maybe speaks to my insanity, the insanity that I've developed in being steeped in this space. But there you go.
No, it's a beautiful message, and hopefully your son does take good care of him. Well, Noah, mate, thank you so much for jumping on Punkcast, man. This has been a wonderful sort of episode, and lovely getting to know you. And I think it's a really special thing when we've got punks like yourself and Beeple and the like, and the caliber of people that we have within our community. And so, a testament to yourself and all the things that you've done. So I think so thank you for that. Any sort of final closing comments on your side, and what's the best way for people to find you?
No, man, I'm just really grateful to be here. So I'm CryptoPunkNoah on Twitter now, and that's really the only place you can find me. And looking forward to a bright future for crypto and NFTs. I also run HowlerzNFT with a Z, but unclear whether or not I'll be posting very much there, or even on CryptoPunkNoah. I'll probably take a hiatus on my son's board, but looking forward to whatever it is the future holds.
Guys, that wraps up another episode of Punkcast for the week, and we'll be back next week with another amazing punk. Bye for now.